Okay. Hello everyone, welcome to IRCICA Heritage Talk. Today our guest is Dr. Hüsam Mehdi. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Mehdi for accepting our invitation and agreeing to make a program with us. Another thank for him will be for his contribution to the book Current Assessments of Islamic Cultural Heritage Around the World, prepared by IRCICA. Thank you again for your contribution. Due to this meeting, we had a chance to meet with you with this report book. Thank you again. In today's program, Dr. Hüsam Mehdi will make a presentation titled "The Built Vernacular Heritage in the Arab Region." Before beginning our program, I would like to briefly tell you about Dr. Mehdi and his contribution to the field of cultural heritage. Dr. Mehdi is an independent consultant and researcher on the conservation of built heritage based in Oxford, UK. He earned his PhD from Glasgow University, Master of Science from Raymond Lemire International Center for Conservation, and also Bachelor of Science from Ain Shams University, Cairo. He is member of ICOMOS UK and president of ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Vernacular Architecture, and also a member of Board of Trustees of Paul Oliver Vernacular Architecture Library at Oxford Brookes University. Dr. Hüsam Mehdi has more than 30 years experience as an architect, researcher, consultant and lecturer on built heritage. Like all our participants, I am looking forward to lecture on built heritage, vernacular heritage in the Arab region, which is very important for the preservation of identity of the countries and the regions. After the presentations, we will forward your questions to our colleague. If you have questions, please ask. I would like to ask you to write on the chat box. Dr. Hüsam Mehdi, I will leave you the floor. You can share your presentation. Thank you again.
Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. It is my honor and pleasure to be hosted by IRCICA Heritage Talks. I am grateful to Dr. Ali Dost Ertugrul for inviting me to contribute to this very important series. I would like to differentiate between two categories of vernacular architecture. That of pre-modern times, represented here by the top photograph of the traditional Gorna village in Luxor, Egypt, and the vernacular architecture in modern times, represented in the bottom photograph by the new Gorna village in Luxor, which was designed by the architect Hassan Fathi. Accordingly, modernity is a key. I would like to argue that in order to understand the built vernacular heritage in the Arab region, we need to understand the impact of modernization, which was introduced to the region by European colonizers. And in order to understand the challenges facing the built vernacular heritage, we need to reflect on the colonial legacy embedded into the modernization projects. Defining a particular type of architecture as vernacular architecture is a Western notion that was developed in the 18th and 19th century with the increasing pace of industrialization and modernization. Urbanization and the rapidly disappearing vernacular way of life led to saving examples of vernacular buildings and moving them to open-air museums, which were known as early as 1891 when Skansen Open Air Museum was established. Defining a particular, the concept of defining a particular type of architecture as vernacular architecture was introduced to the Arab region by Western scholars. Even early Arab pioneers of vernacular architecture, such as the Egyptian architect Hassan Fathy, were part of the Western intellectual landscape rather than the Arab one. Hassan Fathy's seminal book, Architecture for the Poor, was written in English and not translated into Arabic until many years later. And until today, we don't have an Arabic word that we agree on as the equivalent of the English vernacular. Thus, I would like to argue that the study of the built vernacular heritage in the Arab region is a study of the colonial legacy in the region and the pressing need for decolonization. What do I mean by built vernacular heritage? Giles Gilbert Scott was perhaps the first to borrow the term vernacular from the linguistics to refer to domestic architecture in his remarks on Gothic architecture in mid-19th century. But it was Paul Oliver's use of the term in his first book, Shelter and Society, in 1969, that established it as a term for the field of inquiry, embracing the entirety of the subject, including social and cultural processes. I will not dwell much on the definition, but will mention a few alternative terms that are often used but are less inclusive. For example, traditional architecture emphasizes the process of the built form. Primitive architecture refers to the architecture that answers the basic needs of society. Folk architecture refers to the architecture as a part of ethnographic premises. Indigenous architecture refers to a form of building which is particular and original aspect of building in a defined geographic setting. Anonymous architecture refers to buildings without architectural authorship, which may also be defined as architecture without architect. An uninstitutionalized architecture refers to buildings built without institutional design or building processes, which may also be defined as informal architecture. It is interesting that in the Arabic version of announcing this lecture, Al-Sha'bi was used for the vernacular, which translates back to English as folk architecture. Again, because there's no Arabic word for the vernacular. In other words, while the vernacular existed since humans started building shelters, its identification as a distinctive type of architecture is a modern phenomenon, mainly as a reaction to modernity, modernization, and industrialization. I would like to use the preamble of the Economist Charter on built vernacular heritage. The built vernacular heritage occupies a central place in the affection and pride of all peoples. It has been accepted as a characteristic and attractive product of society. It appears informal, but nevertheless orderly. It is utilitarian and at the same time possesses interest and beauty. It is a focus of contemporary life and at the same time a record of the history of society. Although it is the work of man, it is also the creation of time. It would be unworthy of the heritage of man if care were not to conserve these traditional harmonies, which constitute the core of man's own existence. Although the Arab region consists of 22 countries, they share a common cultural heritage, and more so built vernacular heritage. They share language, hence the name Arab region, meaning the region of Arabic-speaking peoples. They share religion, they are Muslim-majority countries. They share environmental and climatic conditions. Most of the Arab region is in the arid climate zone with the deserts and other environmental features such as the Arabian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and important rivers such as the Nile, the Tigris, and Euphrates. Much of the popular culture is also shared. For example, the epic Abu Zayd al-Hilali starts in the Arabian Peninsula, then goes to Egypt and Tunisia. Also, the events and characters of the famous Arabian Nights are from Damascus, Cairo, Baghdad, Oman, and other Arab places. Also, more recent popular culture is shared. As it was said once, that if you travel by car from Baghdad all the way to Marrakesh, you could hear the songs of Kulthum in the streets throughout your whole journey. This brings us to the problem of borders. Actually, you cannot really travel by car from Baghdad to Marrakesh due to national borders and visa restrictions. National borders in the region are one colonial legacy that is relevant to our topic today, as they cut through homogeneous vernacular heritage. For example, Nubia is partly in Egypt and partly in Sudan. The Bedouin communities of the Sahara are located in Egypt, Libya, and the Maghreb, just to mention a couple of examples. The modern Arab nation-states were defined by Western colonial powers as an aftermath of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. On the left of this slide, you see a drawing of Napoleon Bonaparte, who invaded Egypt at the turn of the 19th century, pretending to be Muslim with allegiance to the Sultan in Istanbul, bringing with him the first Arabic press. For some Egyptians, he is the modernizer of Egypt. For others, he is the colonizer. On the right of the slide, you see the statue of Renaissance of Egypt, Nahdat Masr, which symbolizes the modern nation-state of Egypt, as adopted by the Egyptian national movement in early 20th century. Copying the European Renaissance by getting rid of the religion in public affairs, symbolized by the woman taking off her hijab, and reviving ancient civilization, symbolized by ancient Egyptian Sphinx rising. Similar moves were made in other Arab countries, the revival of Babylonians in Iraq, the Phoenicians in the Levant, the Berber in Maghreb, as examples of using pre-Islamic civilizations in building the modern identities of the Arab nation-states. Did we go too far with Europeanization in the process of modernization? This is a big question that remains in discussion for more than a century now. The question was addressed by Yahya Haqqi in his pioneering novella, The Lamp of Hashim. It tells the story of Ismail, an Egyptian young man who was torn between his traditional Arab Islamic upbringing and the Western values and worldview that he acquired during the period he lived and studied medicine in England. Upon his return to Egypt, his professional knowledge as an ophthalmologist was challenged. He found out that Fatima, his cousin and bride-to-be, was treated from an eye disease by traditional practice of applying into her eyes the oil from the lamp of the nearby mausoleum of Hashim, the granddaughter of the Prophet Muhammad. His first reaction was to fling the bottle that contained the lamp oil out of the window. He then went to the mausoleum and raised his stick and brought it down on the lamp. Then he began his professional treatment of Fatima's eyes. He took a great care and did everything by the book. But her eyes became inflamed and the white began to flow into the black of the eye. His treatment failed, despite the professional knowledge and care he put into it. After a period of reflection, he adopted a different approach and tried again to treat Fatma's eyes. This time, he told her that cure will be achieved by the blessing of Hashim after acquiring a bottle of the lamp oil. However, he did not apply the lamp oil internally, as was the tradition. He acknowledged its symbolic value for Fatima without compromising on scientific facts. His treatment succeeded this time, as he regained inner peace, his self-confidence, and the trust of the community. Written in 1940s, the lamp of Hashim remains a pioneering work by one of the Egyptian elites, which critiques their aggressive modernization attempts by dismissing people's traditions, feelings, and values. Back to the vernacular. It is because of the challenges of the dramatic changes of modernization, or shall we say Europeanization, we need to differentiate between the vernacular in pre-modern and modern times. When studying the pre-modern vernacular, rather than talking of the vernacular of each country, I would like to address it without worrying too much about the national borders. Based on socioeconomic aspects and way of life, we could differentiate three major types of the vernacular, and of course there are overlapping types, as the reality is much more complicated than such simple categorization. Let's look into some examples. The earthen domed villages in northern Syria are an example of rural vernacular architecture built with mud and with the construction technique that does without wood in an environment that is lacks wood. Al-Haffa in Salalah, Oman, is an example of coastal vernacular built heritage. All the houses are orientated towards the sea, as it is the main source of livelihood. Sana'a in Yemen is an example of urban vernacular with multi-story houses due to the density in building place. A tent in western desert of Egypt, an example of Bedouin vernacular heritage. Shari in Siwa, Egypt, is an example of the overlapping of Bedouin and rural vernacular. It is an agricultural society in oasis in the western desert with close connection with the Bedouin culture of the desert. So we have both traditions in this place, the Bedouin and the rural. Ras al-Had in Oman is an example of overlapping of Bedouin and urban vernacular. As a recently settled Bedouin community, they keep distances between houses as they used to do when living in a nomadic life. I remember when I was talking to a Bedouin in the desert of Sinai, he was telling me, my brother lives just over there. I couldn't see his brother. I told him, but I cannot see him. And he told me, if you can see him, then he would be too close. So the Bedouins lived so far apart. And this is why when they urbanized, they didn't form any kind of cluster, but tried really to be separated from each other as much as they could. This social housing building in Cairo on the left is an example of the overlapping of rural and urban vernacular. Although the building is a modern architect designed, the inhabitants are recent migrants from the countryside, dealing with their homes as they used to do in their villages, without regard to the urban facade or the intellectual premise of the architectural design. So somebody closed the balcony, and somebody else put a sheet for privacy, some other is growing some birds and chicken and things in the balcony, and colored different, everyone colored the bit of the facade that they could reach from the balcony in different way. And as in their village life, they offer water to the passersby and to animals, and not relying on urban municipal services. That was the vernacular in pre-modern times. As for modern times, we could identify two main categories: the unconscious vernacular and the conscious vernacular architecture. The unconscious vernacular is basically the continuation of the practice of the pre-modern times up to today, but using modern materials as they become more available and more attractive than traditional ones. For example, here we see a house that is built in Siwa oasis in Egypt by modern blocks and cement, but according to the traditional typology around the courtyard, accommodating for humans and animals, and dedicating an upper room for the pigeons. And just like the traditional house, it grows organically, adding a room every time one of the children gets married and forms a nucleus family. I call it unconscious to emphasize that the builders did not consciously aim to build a vernacular building. As for conscious vernacular, it is buildings that were intentionally built as vernacular buildings in terms of architectural style. We could see 5 types of which I will explain in a moment. Intellectual vernacular, which is the architecture that was produced by inspiration from pre-modern vernacular architecture in terms of style. Sometimes also in terms of building materials and or construction techniques. For example, Hassan Fathy was inspired by the Nubian vernacular heritage and by the use of mud building, mud bricks, and by building techniques of domes and vaults. But he did that in Upper Egypt, not in Nubia. Gentrified vernacular. These are pre-modern vernacular buildings that are adapted for modern life by outsiders to the community, in appreciation of the way of life in a vernacular setting, such as this Italian who restored and adapted a vernacular house in Siwa to be his second home. Fake vernacular, which are modern buildings presented as vernacular buildings, such as this one, which is built with modern materials but plastered with mud to give the impression of a vernacular building. Kitsch vernacular. These are buildings that are mainly produced to please and meet the expectations of tourists, such as this building in Aswan. Formal vernacular are buildings that are designed and built by the authorities without the participation of the community in the design or the construction process. The buildings could be considered vernacular from stylistic point of view, if the designer decides so. All these types could be organized along 2 axes. One is with regards to the community engagement, which is the vertical one in this diagram, And the other axis is with regards to materials and techniques, which is the horizontal one on this diagram. I would like to leave you with serious challenges facing the built vernacular heritage today. What to conserve, why, how, and for whom? Is the conservation of a mosque about the bricks or about the prayers? If people want an air conditioning unit, if they wish to have wall-to-wall carpets rather than the reed mats, if they wish to have fluorescent lamps instead of the oil lamps, how do we deal with this? This is a challenge, and where is the authenticity? That's a challenge by the vernacular built heritage, particularly because it is living heritage. Is conservation about the heritage fabric or the heritage tradition? If we conserve the heritage gypsum on the facades of the houses of Sana'a, we will kill the tradition, because there will be no work for these craftsmen anymore, and the tradition will die. And if we continue the tradition, if we allow them to re-plaster them annually as they traditionally do, we lose the authenticity of the fabric of the historic gypsum on the facade. So again, as a living heritage, where is the authenticity and what to do, and how to conserve it, for the future generations? Is conservation about heritage fabric or the community livelihood? How can we regulate vernacular settlement, and how can we balance between the needs of conservation and the needs of the livelihood of the community? And what is the vernacular heritage of the future? What are we giving the future generations vernacular heritage? What are we leaving vernacular heritage for them? What is left that is done without architects today? Will the informal areas and structures of today be the built vernacular heritage of tomorrow? How to reconstruct the vernacular heritage after disasters? Do we reconstruct the same style? Or what really matters is the way of life and the intangible, the values and the culture of the community? When it is destroyed, what to do? How to reconstruct? And I leave you with the most basic question. What is the best Arabic word for vernacular? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehdi. You touched very important topics that will attract all our attendees' attention. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can ask Dr. Mehdi your questions.
Can I ask a question? I'm raising my hand.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Dr. Mehdi, thank you very much for this very inspiring and informative lecture. Actually, I learned a lot. I just wanted to ask about this challenge, which is very important, really. Can we assimilate this challenge, maybe choice or decision making between the vernacular and the modern type, especially if the vernacular one disappears or is destroyed, to the challenge between appropriate technologies on products and industries and modern technologies. Isn't it similar? I mean, when do we leave appropriate technologies in the manufacturing of products? When do we abandon them in favor of modern ones? So I think all these should be determined maybe on the basis of environmental factors and growing developmental needs. And I just wanted to ask whether the scholars, yourself and other experts, have developed any or proposed, suggested any criteria for choice between vernacular, especially when it disappears, reconstructing it or not reconstructing, and modern ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a very important question, and if I understand it correctly, I think modern approaches to sustainable materials and techniques need to learn a lot from the vernacular traditional ones, and need to respect the localities, the different localities, and the different cultural contexts. And I think one major difference between the pre-modern vernacular and our modern way of building today is that the vernacular used to be an honest expression of the culture and needs of the community, but also a full understanding and clever dealing with the environment and the climate. So very often you find, for example, a traditional settlement is done somewhere on a high level because there are floods, for example. Now comes the modern developer and builds a development on the lower land and then gets flooded because this traditional wisdom is not really taken into consideration. The same with things like, for example, mud as a building material, for example, is a very important and sustainable material. So there is a lot to learn from, and so that I would say that the criteria is to be humble enough, which is quite difficult for modern architects, to be humble enough and understand carefully the locality and the community and the environment and the climate, and to learn from the heritage and from the age-old wisdom, and to develop and using new technologies and modern approaches and scientific approaches to build on the knowledge and not to ignore the traditional wisdom and impose something that is and expecting it to be working and sustainable. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, certainly. Thank you very much. We mustn't ignore nor forget and keep it as a cultural heritage, even if we don't rebuild in the same way or we use modern materials.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Another question from Karima Brook. She's asking, what are the challenges posed by increasing urban population density to the vernacular? Could you answer it?
Sorry, well, it's there are a number of challenges for that, and it is a big challenge because of the continuous migration from the countryside to the big cities, and of course, as I showed an example from Cairo, where a way of life is, people when they move from the countryside to urban places and to cities, they don't change culture in one day. So they go with their rural culture, and then they are not very happy. They are not, you know, they don't find it easy to use the urban arrangement, and at the same time, the way they use the buildings and the urban space in cities is also not to the best. So it is, yeah, it is one of the problems that it may be, you know, maybe we'll begin to be better, because with modern now, I mean, like for example, now we are communicating by Zoom. Before Corona, we would usually need to meet in person. So what I'm saying is that for the same kind of arrangement, people now could work remotely and could learn remotely and could communicate remotely. And this relieves a little bit the pressure from the cities, because one major reason why young people migrate from villages to cities is that because they need opportunities of education, of work, of achievement, and fulfilling their inspirations. Now it is becoming more possible to do that without needing to move physically. So hopefully that should help. And I think during the Corona period, there was all these discussions about, because we were restricted to stay in our neighborhoods and couldn't travel far, the urban planners and designers began to talk about the 15-minute neighborhood where everything can be done within a 15-minute walk. Education, shopping, entertainment, whatever. And so it's becoming a little, you know, one step towards the way life was before this huge, growth of big cities. And so hopefully this pressure will be relieved if we use wisely the technologies that are available for us now.
I think another question from Dalia Nabil. Could you ask?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Hussam, for this wonderful presentation, as usual. I'm very much interested in asking a question about the questions you evoked at the end of the presentation, particularly the one about authenticity and keeping the living heritage of practicing craftsmen. There is a lot of debate about, and continuing debates actually, about this balance between authenticity and living heritage. And I would like to know your own point of view, especially when the houses or the vernacular buildings are still living and still have their own dwellers continuing to live there. What is your point of view? What side of the balance we prefer to tend to? Is it the authenticity or the keeping the living heritage and developing it? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dalia, and nice to hear your voice, an old friend. So yes, I think it is a continuous debate, as you said, and there is no right or wrong there, in my opinion. It's no black or white. It's a question of case by case, and I think it should be really mainly based on the values. How do you value the heritage? So, it's a bit like, for example, if you value an old man, you wouldn't mummify him because you would kill him in the process. So, if livelihood, if living community is the most important, and it would kill that livelihood or gentrify it or make it totally falsified or whatever, to keep the authentic fabric, then it would not really be very wise, because at the end of the day, it's human beings and communities are, without them there is no, it doesn't mean anything. We value this heritage for humans, for us, and for our next generations. So if we, in the way, if in the process, if we destroy the way of life, if we destroy, if we dismantle the community, if we chase them out of the place because we want to keep the fabric mummified or something like that, then we are throwing the baby with the bathing water, as the English say. So I think the main point is really to establish what is the significance, what is the values of this heritage, and based on that, the conservation interventions should be about retaining these values. And of course, there is. You cannot. It's not. You cannot win everything. You need. It's like everything in life. So, but it has to be very clearly based on the values of the heritage, from the point of view not only of the professional, but also from the community and the stakeholders. And once that is established, then based on that, we should make our decision on this balance.
Another question from Sima Ahmad. How can we deal with the challenges induced by the continuous disappearance of craftsmanship associated with the vernacular architecture in the Arab region?
Yes, that's a huge challenge, and I don't have a magic solution for that. But I think one aspect, one kind of like major challenge that is beyond all this is that in the Arab region, most people who live in vernacular places and settlements, they aspire to modernize, and that's basically because of the way the culture and the arts and the way we have these examples in TV and cinema and everywhere about the modern way of life. So people aspire to live like that, even if it is not really suitable to their culture and their values, and because of that, there is when that happens, there is no demand on the craftsmen, and therefore they will not teach their kids, to carry on the craft. So I think we need to have more confidence in our traditions and in our identities and in our heritage, and to encourage our local communities to have this pride, and not to consider the kind of like international international style of buildings and living, in reinforced concrete blocks and things like that as a good thing. So I think it's a whole thing. It's not. I mean, one thing leads to another. So if there is demand, you will find that the craftsmen will remain, and they will teach the young ones to continue the craft. If there is no demand, even a craftsman who is very good in his craft will try to change career because he or she wants to make a living. So I think it's much bigger than the vernacular itself. It's more about how we, to what extent we can take pride in our traditions, but also support them and maybe give them, some incentives, like, financial incentives or other ways of encouraging people to continue the traditions. It's a very difficult one, and it cannot be done by one party. It needs a collaborative work, and agreeing that this is a very important objective by governmental, by non-governmental, by the community, by the intellectuals, by, and in the education, in the culture, and so on.
I think we have another question from Amina Benbertal. Would you ask your question, Amina?
Okay, thank you a lot. First of all, thank you, Professor, for your presentation. You raised an important point regarding the broader scope of heritage conservation by asking, when we conserve, do we conserve the prayer or actually the building or the praise? In my opinion, I would like to see what you think about it. In my opinion, actually, when we conserve a building, our intentions go beyond actually the material of it. It goes to preserve the customs and the tradition of a society and therefore the identity of the society. I would like to see what you're thinking about that. And second of all, lately after what's happening in Gaza and in Ukraine, ICOMOS and UNESCO have done a lot of works regarding the matter of reconstruction of the lost heritage. I've always thought that actually reconstruction is a replica. It's creating a replica of an old building, and therefore we do not actually project its value. What do you think of that? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for very important and tricky questions. Well, the first one, yes, I mean, I'm a conservation architect, so of course I feel very strongly about conserving the building and about conserving the way and the details and the tools and objects, or the traditional ones within a building. Even if it's a mosque. However, if that will lead to it being deserted as a prayer place, I would not. I would back off because again, it's to do with the values. So I don't particularly see these values as conflicting. I think the ones who see them as conflicting need to be, negotiated with. I think one aspect, one problem that we have in modern times in the Arab region, as an example, but also in other regions, is there is a split between the intellectual and the professional and the layman. And because of that, so that the professional and the decision maker, they almost carried out exactly what the colonizers used to do, just give orders to the locals, and they have to do it, and if they don't, we force them, and that's that. And if they disagree, that's because they are ignorant. This kind of attitude is why somebody would see that conserving the building as opposed to conserving the prayers are conflicts. They are not conflicts. They only are conflicts when we have all these social diseases, when we have these problems that rather than being humble enough and trying to really bring the community on board in the decisions and in the thinking, and be patient in trying to explain to them, for example, the authenticity. I mean, you look, I give you an example. all the mosques in Cairo, in Iraq, in Iran, in many places where they are popular because one of the Prophet's family is buried there, like Hussein, Zainab, and so on. You'll find the building rebuilt hundreds of times, and it's like a big festival with chandeliers, with neon lamps, with reinforced concrete, huge monumental minarets, and so on. Why? Because of the passion of the people who are dealing with these mosques. But this passion is not, properly informed by the professionals, because the professionals, they are not really, talking the same language, and so we have this. Whenever there is a very strong pressure from the religious, you find a lot of destruction. Look at Mecca and Kaaba. Everything is gone in Mecca, not because of bad intentions. It's good intentions, but they are not informed by the conservation professionals. This gap, this huge gap between the professionals and the community, which, because the professionals belong intellectually and scientifically mainly to Western thinking and approaches and techniques and tools. And while our communities have their own very strong culture that is very, very specific. It's not Western and it's different. So rather than trying to find a way of proper communication and collaboration, we deal with them as if they are ignorant. So that's one issue. I think this is why it is happening in this way, that it shouldn't really. And as for the other question about reconstruction after wars, it's again, there is no black and white, there is no right or wrong. I think the community needs to decide. For example, I give you famous examples. After the Second World War, the Polish decided to rebuild Warsaw exactly as it was before bombarded, whereas the Dutch were considered the destruction as a nice chance to build fresh, modern, new buildings. These are choices by the communities. And but in any case, the authenticity is gone. But if the community feels that to deal with the trauma they need to rebuild a replica, be it. If it is not the case, then the authenticity is gone, and therefore maybe we can use the same philosophy, the same techniques, but it doesn't have to be replicas.
Are there any questions? Thank you, Dr. Sam. You asked and also you highlighted very valuable questions. I think this is the weakest point of our cultural heritage preservation around the Islamic world. You ask good questions. We will discuss it. We will think about it. Thank you. Also, I would like to thank to everyone who attended our program, and also Dr. Sam Mehdi. Hope to see you next IRCICA Heritage Talk program, and also maybe we can organize another program about the vernacular heritage and also other discussions. Thank you for everyone. See you. Hope to see you, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Assalamu alaikum.
Goodbye.
Hocam toplantı bitti mi?
Bitti bitti.
Aa güzel.
Evet.